And now it's my pleasure to welcome Laura Kahn from Princeton University, who's going to present a One Health perspective on foodborne illness and antimicrobial resistance. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm absolutely honored to be here today to give you a One Health perspective on foodborne illness and antimicrobial resistance. My apologies, I have a lot of material to cover, so I'm going to be talking really fast. So let's see. Now you've heard talks about One Health. I'm from the One Health realm. And for me, One Health is very simply the concept that human, animal, environmental, and ecosystem health are linked. Because they are linked, it provides a useful framework for analyzing and examining complex issues, such as infectious diseases with zoonotic and/or environmental and ecosystem components. That's our website, onehealthinitiative.com. Please visit it. It's a labor of love for all of us involved in it. There have been challenges with implementing One Health. Just to give you a quick overview of it, funding streams are generally targeted to specific disciplines. As you've heard previously, there have been silos that have been built up over the years in academia, government, and industry that have been difficult to bridge. But it's inherently multidisciplinary, but lately has been largely driven by the veterinary medical community. Public health is generally underfunded, much less One Health, which focuses on animals and the environment as well. Admittedly, we've had difficulty getting the environmental component, and I'd be thrilled to talk with you after this talk on strategies on integrating it more. When we first started out, it focused primarily on zoonotic diseases, and we were wondering, well, how do we fit in sick plants? It wasn't really clear how to do that. So we've moved on, but certainly have a ways to go. And we certainly need more collaboration between fields such as microbiology, geology, botany, entomology, certainly, agriculture, epidemiology, veterinary medicine has been a driver. And medicine, if we are to understand the complex, wicked global health issues that we are faced with in the 21st century. Quick examples of One Health programs. You've heard the PREDICT program led by Dr. Jana Mazet at UC Davis. The One Health Institute recently discovered Marburg bats in Sierra Leone. Dr. Gregory Gray at Duke has been studying respiratory viruses in Asia. And Dr. Peter Rabinowitz at the Center for One Health Research at the University of Washington. CDC's been holding some One Health workshops prioritizing zoonotic pathogens. They've included the viral hemorrhagic fevers, influenza viruses, rabies, and anthrax. These are what the countries themselves are prioritizing. The WHO has listed top 10 global causes of death. On the left, from the year 2000. On the right, 2016. I'm going to be focusing on the diarrheal diseases. We have made progress. The diarrheal diseases was in the middle of the pack in 2000 and has dropped to number 9 in 2016. But for low-income countries, diarrheal diseases are the second leading causes of death after respiratory diseases. So the diarrheal diseases are spread by the fecal-oral route, have a deadly impact, especially with children. According to WHO, they are the second leading cause of death in children under 5, and globally 1.7 billion cases of child diarrheal diseases each year, leading to malnutrition. So now in this workshop, much of the focus is going to be on the abiotic environmental contaminants, the heavy metals, the pesticides, the toxins. In my talk today, I'm going to talk about the biotic environmental contamination, focusing specifically on human and animal fecal matter. And I'm going to be using One Health as a framework to examine this problem, focusing on foodborne illness and antimicrobial resistance. So exposure to animal feces and human health. This study done in environmental science and technology specifies that sanitation systems typically address human but not animal fecal matter. And animal fecal matter contaminates human domestic environments, especially in low-income countries. And the question then is, what is the magnitude of the problem? Well, looking at the biomass distribution on Earth, this was a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy back in recently in November. If you look at the on the left side, the left square, that little triangle that says animals, it's blown up to the right. Arthropods and fish make up most of the biomass distribution on Earth, but in this talk, I'm going to focus primarily on livestock and humans, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of the right-hand square. And wild mammals make up just a tiny fraction of the mammalian biomass. If you look at some of the changes from 1900 to 2000, increasingly over time, humans and their domesticated animals are constituting more and more of the mammalian biomass on the planet, and now estimated to constitute approximately 96 to 98% of the mammalian terrestrial biomass, with only about 3% left of wild mammals. And in terms of diversity, there's only about 14 species of livestock. So these are not genetically diverse species that we use for our livestock. Broiler chickens, according to the FAO data, standing population of broiler chickens, the chickens that we raise for meat, are now almost 23 billion birds, and they estimate in this paper, combined mass now exceeds all other birds on the planet. So you could consider then broiler chickens as a signal of a reconfigured biosphere, if you will, and our per capita meat consumption is only increasing to meet food security in the coming years as our population increases. Now, for those of you with children, you're familiar with the famous book by Taro Gomi, Everyone Poops, Everyone Eats, and so everyone poops. And humans and their livestock produce massive amounts of fecal matter that are contaminating our environments. And this study done by Berendez and Nature Sustainability estimates the global recoverable animal and human fecal biomass. They estimated that in 2014, humans and their domesticated animals, this does not include dogs and cats, by the way, almost 4 trillion kilograms of fecal matter. Animals make up about 80% of this total fecal biomass. Chickens, cattle, and sheep constitute the largest animal populations. And since 2003, they estimate that total fecal matter production has been increasing by over 52 billion kilograms per year. And by 2030, they estimate that total fecal mass is estimated to be 4.6 trillion kilograms per year. Now, to put all of this into perspective, I calculated that the total fecal matter produced by humans and their livestock would fill over 22 million Olympic-sized swimming pools, and by 2030, over 26 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. That's a lot of. This study done, as I had previously mentioned, Environmental Science and Technology, this study, the authors identified only 62 studies that met their inclusion criterion, looking at the health outcomes of human exposure to animal fecal matter. Now, we usually just focus on human fecal matter. Main health outcomes include diarrhea, pathogens in the stool, non-specified nutrition and growth, helminth seropositivity, and trachoma. The livestock included poultry, cattle, goats, and sheep. And the bacterial pathogens were your familiar foodborne pathogens, including E. coli, Campylobacter, Salmonella, and Shigella. There are many pathways to exposure to animal fecal matters. I'm not going to read them out to you. But what's important to note is that the authors identified only 7 intervention studies aimed at reducing the exposure to animal fecal matter. So this is a very understudied, under-interventioned challenge. And they propose that rather than the standard fecal-oral transmission pathways focusing on human feces, they should include animal fecal matter as well. And I would argue that we have to include not only human fecal matter, but animal fecal matter when you're looking at biotic environmental contamination posing human health risks. So let me turn now to foodborne illnesses. Agriculture is the foundation of civilization, but it comes with costs, and that includes environmental contamination for a variety of reasons, not only pesticides, but also, as I'm arguing, the biotic contamination, ecosystem destruction, and infectious diseases. And the question we must all ask ourselves is, how can we feed everybody without destroying the planet's biosphere? And this is a question that we really have to address using a One Health, EcoHealth, or planetary health. It has to be an interdisciplinary approach to be able to answer that kind of question. But the global burden of foodborne illnesses is substantial, major global health issue. And in 2010, they estimate about 600 million illnesses, 420,000 deaths globally. Of the species that cause the agents that cause it, norovirus and Campylobacter cause the most illnesses. Non-typhoidal salmonella causes the most deaths likely. And these agents are typically due to fecal contamination. Fecal matter is used as fertilizer in crop agriculture. It's applied to the fields. Rain causes it to run off into the waterways, causing excess nitrogen and phosphorus, leading to eutrophication in lakes and coastal waters, that leads to pollution and death of the fish and other organisms living in those waters. Environmental fecal contamination also increases our risk for both foodborne and waterborne illnesses. An important point that I learned at the Entomological Society meeting last year is that flies can transmit fecal matter and pathogens to food, and they might be serving as important disease vectors by defecating and regurgitating on fresh produce. One study found that flies contaminated lettuce with E. coli and salmonella from cattle manure. Another found flies transmitted E. coli to spinach leaves. And it's important to note that climate change, according to this study by Goulson in Applied Ecology, climate change might increase the world housefly population by 244% by 2080. So we definitely need more studies assessing the risks of flies, insect arthropod vectors transmitting fecal pathogens to food. Now let me switch gears now to talk about antimicrobial resistance, because as with food safety and foodborne illness, antibiotic use and resistance is also linked with fecally contaminated environments, or at least there's evidence for that. Now, this is a huge issue. A report done in 2014, shared by economist Jim O'Neill, estimates that right now, there's about estimated 700,000 deaths from antimicrobial resistance, and if nothing is done, that can go balloon up to 10 million by 2050. It's going to be a global challenge, but the nations in Asia and Africa will probably be the most affected by AMR deaths. It's going to have a huge economic impact, estimating a cumulative 100 trillion loss of economic output by 2050 if nothing is done to address this challenge. You're going to be hearing a lot about the human and animal microbiome, so I'm not going to go into this at length, but we are discovering that the microbes that are in us and on us have as much of an effect on our health and disease as our organs. And as discussed in the previous slides, massive amounts of human and animal fecal matter are contaminating environments and ecosystems and disrupting our microbiome. So the global resistome, there's this term out there, metagenomic studies suggest that antibiotic resistance genes are ancient and that they're everywhere, and that they predate the selective pressures of modern antibiotic use. And there have been antibiotic resistance genes in showing resistance to tetracycline, penicillin, vancomycin, other antibiotics in places such as the Alaskan and permafrost dating to the late Pleistocene. So these are ancient DNA sequences what's changing is our changing the biome, increasing the expression of these resistance genes. So we are adversely affecting the global resistome through our poor sanitation, indiscriminate antibiotic use, whether it's in humans or animals, widespread human and animal fecal matter, contamination, and wildlife spread these resistant microbes and resistance genes far and wide. According to UNICEF, about 1 billion people are openly defecating, meaning that they go out into fields and squat. And of these 1 billion, about 600 million live in India. So India has some of the most heavily microbial-laden environments in the world. And they also have some of the most resistant organisms in the world, too. This isn't just a challenge for developing countries. We have a lot of manure lagoons. This is an image of a flooded manure lagoon after Hurricane Matthew in 2016. We don't really know yet what the impact of Hurricane Florence was on North Carolina, but they have a lot of pig farms in that state. And these waters, the flood waters, carry large amounts of animal waste downstream and out to sea. And the question is, what is the public and environmental health impact from that? This study done by Barrondes estimated country levels of fecal matter. The countries with the highest levels of fecal matter are China, India, Brazil, the US, and Pakistan. Countries with the highest animal to human fecal ratios, however, was interesting. It was the Western Pacific, specifically Australia and New Zealand. And that's probably because they have so many livestock, sheep, compared to humans. But what is interesting, and this might be just purely coincidental, but this study looking at antibiotic consumption per person in 2010 noted the very high levels of antibiotic consumption per person in Australia and New Zealand. And it wasn't really clear why they were such high consumers. And the question then is there a relationship between environmental fecal contamination, particularly animal fecal contamination, and antibiotic consumption, or is it completely a red herring? But I would like to see studies looking at that specifically, why these countries have such high antibiotic use per capita compared to other countries. Total antibiotic consumers, it's of course India, China, and the US. Now, this was a very interesting study done by John Michelanos at Harvard, and his colleagues was very interested in looking at the relationship between Vibrio cholera and the environment, trying to figure out why there are episodic outbreaks of cholera, particularly after storms. And what he found was that there was an inverse relationship between cholera outbreaks and the Vibriophages, the bacteriophages that specifically target the Vibrio cholera bacteria in the waters in Bangladesh. And so what happens is when there is a storm, the homeostasis that normally exists between the Vibrio cholera strains and the Vibriophages get disrupted, allowing then the proliferation of the Vibrio cholera bacteria. Then you get an outbreak. And the outbreak doesn't subside, they discovered, until the Vibriophages are re-equilibrated in the waters, and then the outbreak goes away. And this happened with the different strains of cholera. This is an image of the Vibriophages in the waters of Bangladesh, and this is the schematic model that they used to talk about the seasonality and how storms would affect the appearance of cholera outbreaks or not. I suspect that in our environment, our biome, there is a lot going on between the bacteria and the phages that really is in its infancy, and we really need to study how the climate influences the appearance of different outbreaks that clearly are related to climactic conditions. Bacteriophages, in case you're not familiar with them, they are the natural foes against bacteria. And since time immemorial, they've been doing a tit for tat with the bacteria in the environment. This is going on all around us. This is going on in us and on us. This constant interchange between the bacteria and these phages. And because of that, resistance is less of an issue with the phages because the phages evolve as the bacteria evolve. And so you can always find phages that are going to be effective against the bacteria. And in essence, then, you can think of the CRISPR-Cas9 as the bacterial immune system against phages. And they are the most prevalent bioform on the planet. And they might be an important strategy against antibiotic resistance in bacteria. The FDA has approved some phage products for food safety on the market, and they might serve as an important strategy in dealing with environmental bacterial buildup, if you will. But a number of issues with them have to be addressed in order to make this a feasible solution. I just also want to point out that the UN General Assembly held a high-level meeting on antimicrobial resistance back in 2016, and this was based on the World Health Assembly developing a global action plan on antimicrobial resistance, and they recognized the importance of a multidisciplinary One Health approach. The WHO, FAO, and OIE developed a manual for countries to create their national action plans. Their 5 strategic objectives included improving awareness through education and training, strengthening knowledge and evidence base through surveillance and research, sanitation, hygiene, and infection, but they did not specifically mention animal fecal matter or human fecal matter in the environment for that matter. Optimizing, of course, use of antibiotic medicines, and developing an economic case for sustainable investment. Now, there are antimicrobial resistance monitoring systems around the world. Here in the U.S., we have the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System, or NARMS, which tracks enteric bacteria in ill people through the CDC, retail meats, the FDA, food animals through the USDA, the National Animal Health Monitoring System, or NAMS, through the National Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, has been tracking antimicrobial resistance in swine. Unfortunately, a lapse in funding has diminished efforts. The European Union has an animal AMR surveillance reports of EU member countries, and WHO has developed what's called GLASS, or the Global Antimicrobial Resistance Surveillance System. And this is GLASS country enrollment as of May 2018. There are plenty of countries, but there is certainly room for improvement. And so in conclusion then, I'd just like to say that One Health provides a useful framework for analyzing some of these complex health issues involving humans, animals, and the environments or ecosystems in a systematic way. Humans and their domesticated animals produce massive amounts of fecal matter in the environment, estimated to increase by 2030 to almost 5 trillion kilograms. And we need to figure out what to do with that because it's only increasing, particularly since domesticated animals produce about 80% of it. And we need to look at how that impact of that biotic contamination is impacting human health. Studies needed to examine the role then of bacteriophages in mitigating the health impact of fecally derived pathogens in the environment. And finally, antimicrobial resistant national action plans should discuss the need to examine human and animal fecal matter in contaminating environments. And so with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention, and I look forward to discussions later today. Thank you.